Hello and welcome to week 3 of photography. This week we'll be looking at genres of photography with a specific focus on the genre of portraiture. What are photography genres? Well, genre in general refers to the subject matter of the photograph, but also refers to how certain types of subject matter there has a tendency to be a similar style and similar techniques used that accompany that specific subject matter. Different genres can vary on the spectrum of how much you need to plan ahead of time as a photographer, and how much as a photographer you just need to be ready to react and capture the perfect moment. Also, different genres not just need different techniques, but might need different kinds of lenses. So let's take a quick moment and look at photography lenses. There are two main kinds of lenses. One of them is a fixed focal distance lens, and one of them is a telephoto or zoom lens that has a range of focal distances. Fixed focal distance lenses are often called prime lenses, and what it means is they don't zoom in or out. So the way that you zoom in or out with a prime lens is you physically move yourself closer or move yourself farther away. Fixed focal distance lenses often come at either 35 millimeters, 50 millimeters, or 85 millimeter focal distance. Basically, just what that means is how far away is the focal distance. So this may or may not make sense, but a 35 millimeter, actually, it's got a closer focal distance, and so it means it includes more of the area it's looking at. So it actually feels further away from the subject matter. An 85 millimeter on the other end has a longer focal distance, so it actually feels closer to the object. So it feels a little bit more like you've zoomed in, just so you can figure out what are the differences between those types of lenses. One of the reasons you might pick a prime lens is because they often take really good photos. Since they don't have a lot of stuff going in inside the lens, they're much simpler lenses. They can actually, because of that simplicity, take really high quality photos. So they're often used for portraits, for still lifes, or if you're just walking around and you want sort of a normal range and don't mind not being able to like zoom in or zoom out on something, a prime lens is a really good lens. And again, because they're less complicated, they have a tendency to be cheaper than a really good telephoto or zoom lens. So the flip side of the opposite, rather, of a fixed focal distance lens is a telephoto or zoom lens. And that just basically means there's actually two lenses in there moving closer or further away from each other, and it adjusts the focal distance of the lens. So it can feel like you're really close up to something or really far away from something. Telephoto lenses come in a variety of ranges. The one that you're looking at here on the screen says it's 24 to 70 millimeter. So that would be called a mid-range lens, where it's good for everyday stuff, but you're not actually going to zoom in very far on anything. So if you want to really get into, say, wildlife photography, travel photography, candid photography, you might need a higher end distance lens, so like 80 millimeters to 200 millimeters or even beyond that. One of the trade-offs of a telephoto zoom lens that zooms in far away is that it actually gets bigger because this is optical zoom, so it really matters how far apart those lenses are. So a bigger telephoto lens means you can zoom in further, but then you're also carting around and dealing with a giant lens. Some other lenses you may come across either in your textbook or other photography reading or videos are macro lenses. So a macro lens can either be a fixed distance lens or a telephoto lens, but they're designed to be able to photograph things close up. So they can focus on things really close and get details. And they often blur. They have a really big aperture so you can blur out the background nicely. And then a wide angle lens is another option. A wide angle lens, usually they are telephoto lenses, but it basically just means that they sort of extend the angle of vision wider than the human eye. So they include more in the photograph than you would normally include with a normal lens, or even than you can really see with your eyes. So you'll notice that on the end of the wide angle lens, it actually gets wider because it's including more. So wide angle lenses are great for landscapes because when you're far away from something, it can include a lot of the edge. If you've ever tried to take pictures of a mountain range and been frustrated that it's only including part of the mountain range, a great solution is a wide angle lens. Also, if you've ever looked at real estate pictures, they are often taken with a wide angle lens because it makes it feel like the room is really bigger than it is. But you'll notice that things that get close to a wide angle lens on the edge feel distorted. And that's one of the one of the kind of frustrating things about a wide angle lens. If you're farther away, it doesn't matter so much, but if you're close up, you'll see that distortion. Okay, so let's jump back to genres. One classic genre is landscape photography. And landscape photography, when you're taking pictures of a landscape, usually you want to include a lot of it in your photograph. So there's a lot of space, a lot of distance in landscape photography, and they often have what's called a large depth of field, which basically just means you're not blurring out the background. Everything's in focus. So in this picture, the people in the boat up front are in focus, and the big mountains in the distance are also in focus, because of all the beautiful details. You can also take cityscape photographs. So it's a similar principle in that you are taking a photograph into a large distance, deep space, but in the case of a city, it's a city as opposed to nature. Another genre is candid photography. With candid photography, you're trying to capture an unstaged moment. So as a photographer, you sort of want to fade into the background. You don't want to be noticed. And using a zoom lens can help you be further away so that you aren't noticed. As soon as someone notices that you're taking a picture of them, people have a tendency to try to pose. They become awkward. So a truly candid photograph, the people don't notice that you're there. So a zoom lens, quick shutter speed, these are things that can help you with candid photography. And the capability to react. You need to be patient and be paying attention so that you can capture just the perfect moment. The opposite of candid photography is staged photography. This is where everything is planned out. Set, costumes, lighting, makeup, everything. And it is the exact opposite of candid photography. So this photographer is a fashion photographer named Tim Walker. He does some really weird but interesting stuff for magazines like Vogue. And he builds everything. So this entire set is built. The costumes are all made. He's working with all that. They brought a little mini horse in. So he's sort of the extreme example of what a staged photograph looks like. And it's possible here, you'll notice there's some distortion on the sides of the photograph. It's possible he's using something called a fisheye lens, which is like a wide angle lens, but it essentially, instead of being wide, it applies it all the way around the edge of the lens. Or it's possible that he actually built this set to look like this. So he's known for creating sort of visual effects that look like they could be digital but are actually built and just taken with one photograph. So he plans everything out and gets those photographs exactly how he wants them. Another genre, so this could possibly come under the larger genre of nature photography. So landscape photography can also be nature photography, but this one is wildlife photography, where you're seeking out bugs and animals in the wild, in their natural element. With this, you definitely need a zoom lens because you're probably not going to be able to get real close. You need a fast shutter speed and you need a lot of patience. So you need to wait for that perfect moment. Here you can see the little coyote pup is staring straight at the photographer, and the other, maybe perhaps the mom and dad, are kind of protectively hovering over that pup. So you get this lovely family portrait of these coyotes in their element. Another subgenre of nature photography could be flower photography. With flower photography, macro lenses can be really nice to use because you're getting close to the flowers. You don't need to worry about zooming in so much because you can approach them. And with flower photography, you often want to be really aware of good lighting because flowers can be really temperamental in how they react to light. But they also have the capability of being really interesting in how they react to light. So they can be transparent. They can look lovely with dramatic shadows or with soft lighting. So pay attention to lighting with flower photography. Another genre is travel photography. Travel photography is usually some combination of landscape and candid with a little bit of photojournalism thrown in. But you're more often than not, you're documenting your experiences, but you're also documenting this place that you have gone to that maybe is a little bit unique and different from the places you're normally around. And then last week we talked about photojournalism. So photojournalism is a big genre of photography. So anything often that you see in newspapers or magazines often falls under the category of photojournalism. Good photojournalists are journalists first. Well, I should say maybe equally photographers and journalists. But they do their research. They get to know their story so that they can tell the story truthfully and tell the story well. A good photojournalist often has a lot of courage, right? These people are going into war zones. They're going into places where they're maybe not welcome. And they get in there and they get the photograph that they think they need. A zoom lens can be a really helpful lens to have with photojournalism, again, because you don't have to be so close. You can stand back and observe the story as it unfolds. And just like candid photography, patience and being willing to capture the right moment and wait for it is really important in photojournalism. Another type of kind of sort of candid or photojournalistic photography is wedding or event photography, where you're going to an event and you're trying to capture what happens at the event. A zoom lens can be really important so you don't have to get up close. And with wedding photography and event photography, often the lighting is really bad. So you want to know how to work with bad lighting conditions, both in how you take the picture, but also how you edit the picture. So wedding photography often is a combination of candid photography and portrait photography. So you're combining both of those skills. And the genre that we are the most excited about this week, portrait photography. The goal of a good portrait is to celebrate your subject. You can reveal something of your subject's story. You can reveal something about their personality. If you talk about portrait photography simply, usually you're focused on a person's face, right? You're showing who a person is through their face. But ultimately, a good portrait will show more than just a person's face. It will tell something about that person as well. A good portrait, not 100% of the time, but often has a very simple background. And what this does is it just allows the emphasis to rest on the face. We're not distracted by stuff in the background. We're focused on the face and that person and who that person is. Also, good portraits often make use of soft, indirect, and side lighting. So soft lighting basically just means you don't have harsh lights and harsh darks. So there's not any bright white patches where shiny skin reflects the light. It falls across the skin softly and it feels nicer, right? It's just a much gentler treatment of a face. There's no harsh shadows going on. So no crazy like nose shadows or weird eye socket shadows. It illuminates the face gently and nicely. And then side lighting is just a good way to show the form of the face. So you can see in this picture, it's lighter on one side and darker on the other side. Now there is some light coming in from the other side, but they've emphasized the light on one side. And that creates just a little bit more drama, a little bit more three-dimensional form that makes the photograph interesting. There's some contrast there that is really nice. When you're taking a picture, you may not have access to beautiful studio lights that a lot of portrait photographers have access to. So one easy way to get soft and direct lighting is to stand next to a north-facing window or any window on a cloudy day. So you get the side light coming in from the window. It's the natural light of the sun. Most indoor lights are really not good lights for photography, for portrait photography, for any photography to be honest, but especially for portrait photography. They often have a weird color cast. They can cast bright spots and not illuminate the whole face. They're harsh or not strong enough. But indirect natural lighting, so the sun on a cloudy day or that window that doesn't have the sun shining directly in it, is one of the best types of lighting for portrait photography. Another thing that you need to experience with portrait photography, or you need to master, should I say, is something called art directing. The larger sense of art directing basically just means as a photographer, you need to know your goal for the photograph, and you need to work with the people around you and communicate with them so that you can achieve your goal. So if you're lucky enough to have a photo assistant who will move lights or double check your photo on the computer, great. Make sure you're communicating with that assistant. Sometimes you don't have an assistant, so it means you need to be the one who's moving lights or moving an object. If there's like a stray bag or object in the background of your photograph and you want to get it out of there, you might need to move it. That's part of art directing. But when we talk about art directing with portrait photography, one of the biggest things that you need to do is to put your model at ease. You are communicating with your subject, with your model, to help them feel comfortable. So good portrait photographers are constantly interacting with the people that they're photographing, which means they're both focused on how they're talking, but also how they're taking photographs. It's a complex thing to do. So you can tell jokes to make people feel comfortable. You can ask them questions. Sometimes when you're art directing, you're telling them what you want them to do. Lean forward, put your hands on your hips. I need you to step forward a little bit. Can you angle yourself? Don't the other way. But do it in a way that helps the person feel more confident and comfortable with what they're doing, as opposed to making them feel uncomfortable. So it's really important that you feel confident in how you're communicating with the person that you're photographing, and that will help them feel comfortable too. So art directing is really just about communicating, and specifically with portraits, it's about putting that subject at ease. I think this is an interesting photo because you get to see a portrait photographer. This is John Keatley, who we're going to look at. You get to see him at work. So you can see his lights, how he's getting down low to be on the same level as the person that he's photographing, how he found a simple white background to photograph against, even though I don't think this is his studio. He's got the setup, he's got an assistant there, so it's just fun to see what this looks like in action. Your goal this week is, as always, to take 2 photographs, but in taking 2 photographs, to take a lot more than 2 photographs. But one of your photographs should be a portrait, so find someone who's willing to let you take their portrait. Please follow the instructions in the book and the assignment sheet. And then work really hard to make your model feel comfortable, so that you get your goal is you're trying to bring out something interesting in their pose, in their expression, something that tells the story of this person. So work really hard to make that interesting. Don't just tell someone to like stand there and smile, but see what you can do to draw out something interesting in your photograph. Search for a simple background and look for good, indirect, soft, natural side lighting. That is the best kind of lighting you can work with for this portrait. So work to find that kind of lighting. For your other photograph, I'd like you to just test out another genre. So the chapter from Better Photo Basics this week, step 3, has a lot of instructions on how to take different types of photographs, different genres of photographs, and what you kind of need to do that sort of genre. So please follow the author's instructions for how to go about photographing that genre and have fun. There's a lot of different ideas and different options that can be fun to do. Your inspiration this week are both 2 portrait photographers that are contemporary portrait photographers. The first one is John Keatley. He's a Seattle photographer. And one of the things that John Keatley is really good at is bringing humor into his photographs. I think we often get the sense that, oh, we need to make everyone smile and look pretty. But what's the fun in that? So this is a portrait of Luke Burbank, who does a podcast called Too Beautiful to Live, and is a comedian and does a lot of radio stuff. And he started out doing his podcast in his bathroom. And so John Keatley built a bathroom with some classic radio things to kind of show the humor of that. You can see there's an interesting pose. He's like got, it's not a standard portrait outfit, but it makes it all that much more interesting. And even though John built a set, he very carefully made the actual background behind the head simple, right? So that, again, the focus really is on the face of Luke. And then we kind of notice the other things that really help tell the story. The pose helps tell the story. The facial expression kind of makes it feel quirky and funny. And Luke Burbank is a quirky and funny person. So it really tells the story of this person and his kind of what he does for work. Here's another portrait by John Keatley. So the previous portrait was a commercial portrait. Someone paid John to take that photograph. This comes out of a personal series that John Keatley does way back when the iPhone was new, and they really started getting cell phone photography was starting to actually be decent. John went around taking portraits with his iPhone. And so one of the things that I think is interesting is he gets really high quality portraits with some of the early iPhones. And he went and he found simple backgrounds and he found natural lighting. So instead of using all of his studio gear, like most professional photographers, he was one of the first professional photographers to just take his phone around and ask strangers and ask people, hey, can I take your portrait? And even then, he still found really good backgrounds, really good lighting. And if you ever look at his iPhone series or his quarantine series, one of the things that he's good about is he doesn't just take pictures of people with a smile on their face. He taps into their emotions, he taps into their stories, and he pulls out really unique expressions on their face. So we sort of feel the feelings of these people, whether they're happy or quirky or confused or sad. We're drawn into the emotions of these people. The other photographer is Steve McCurry, who is a photographer for National Geographic and other travel magazines. And this is one of his most famous photos. And last week, the compositional tips video was all of both his compositional tips and his photographs. So if you look at this photograph, some of the things to notice, he's really good at finding bright colors. But he simplifies those colors. So in this photograph, it's not all the colors ever, it's bright contrasting colors. So red and green are opposites on the color wheel, which means that they make each other feel brighter. They make each other pop more. So there's a unity with the green underdress that she has, the green background, and her green eyes. Those all draw each other out. And then the red that separates all of those creates contrast and creates pop. Again, Steve McCurry is good at finding simple backgrounds and soft indirect lighting to take his pictures. And with a lot of his pictures, you'll notice that he puts the dominant eye right in the center, and it makes it feel like that person's staring right at you. So there's an intensity to the gazes of a lot of his portraits that it both draws you in, but kind of makes you feel the intensity of these people's lives. Here's another portrait by Steve McCurry. So again, he's got those bright colors, but you're not overwhelmed by tons of colors, so you really feel the brightness of that one color. There's a simple background. In this case, he made it by blurring out the background, but more often than not, he actually just finds a simple background. But what's interesting to me about this photograph is how the hand enters into the portrait and how the prop, the stick, enters into the portrait. And even the jewelry, the headdress, those props, those costume things can tell a lot about a person, and they can help. You don't want to make a portrait too complicated, but bringing a few other things in can help to tell the story. And Steve McCurry, one of the things I find interesting is the pictures of people he takes. Often the kids have dirty faces. The old people have wrinkles. They're not perfect people, and yet he manages to show them in such a beautiful way that these people feel interesting and engaging. We want to get to know them, even though they're not this celebrity photograph that's been perfectly photoshopped and make-upped and all those things. So, as with all the inspiration, if you ever really like a photographer, you should look them up and look at more of what they do and try to learn from what they do. But for now, it is your turn to go out and take a portrait. Have a great week and enjoy your camera.